On September 4th, 2025, two Venezuelan F-16 fighter jets roared low over the USS Jason Dunham, a US Navy-guided missile destroyer operating in international waters. The Pentagon called it highly provocative. Caracas called it sovereignty. Was this a reckless maneuver or Nicolas Maduro's calculated message to Donald Trump and Washington? The story is stark. Venezuelan jets buzzing a US warship in the Caribbean. The timing is no accident. Just 48 hours earlier, the United States launched a deadly strike on a vessel Washington claimed was tied to Venezuela's most feared transnational gang, Tren de Aragua. 11 people were killed. President Trump declared them narco-terrorists. Within 2 days, Maduro's jets were overhead, daring the Americans in international waters. To understand this moment, we need to rewind. On September 2nd, 2025, the US military, acting under direct orders from the Trump administration, struck a boat off the southern Caribbean. Officials said it was crewed by members of Tren de Aragua, a violent Venezuelan criminal network that has spread across Latin America. The Pentagon framed it as a kinetic strike against narco-terrorism. The Venezuelan government, however, denied the claim. Officials accused Washington of staging evidence, even hinting that the US used AI-generated video to justify the operation. For Caracas, the deaths weren't cartel fighters, they were victims of American aggression. This strike didn't happen in isolation. It came amid a massive US military buildup in the Caribbean, warships, thousands of Marines, and now 10 F-35 stealth fighters deployed to Puerto Rico. Officially, Washington calls it an anti-drug operation, but in Caracas, it looks like regime change in slow motion. That brings us back to September 4th. The USS Jason Dunham was patrolling international waters when Venezuelan F-16s swept overhead. The Pentagon called it unsafe and unprofessional. CBS News went further, a show of force. From a purely military perspective, it was carefully measured. The jets didn't fire weapons, they didn't lock radar. They flew over, made their point, and returned to base. The message was unmistakable. Venezuela is willing to contest US presence in its near abroad. For Trump, the optics were clear. His administration doubled down, warning Maduro not to interfere with counter-narcotics missions. For Maduro, the flyover was his way of saying Venezuela won't be intimidated. Maduro's strategy rests on several pillars. First, framing himself as a defender of sovereignty. He portrays US deployments as a criminal and bloody threat aimed at regime change. In televised speeches, he told Venezuelans his country is super prepared and ready for war. This language isn't just about military readiness, it's about rallying nationalist pride. Second, Maduro has mobilized militias and troops. Images circulated of Venezuelan reservists drilling, of armored vehicles moving near the Colombian border, and of fiery speeches calling for resistance. Third, Caracas has sought to muddy the waters on US claims. The communications minister, Freddy Ñañez, went so far as to accuse Washington of using fabricated or AI-generated footage to justify the September 2nd strike. In an era where digital manipulation is a genuine fear, the allegation strikes a chord with audiences already skeptical of US intervention. The stakes extend far beyond this flyover. For the United States, the Caribbean is a critical sphere of influence. For Venezuela, it is a lifeline, surrounded by sanctions and dependent on limited trade routes. When a US destroyer patrols so close to Venezuelan waters, it feels less like counter-narcotics and more like intimidation. This clash also risks ripple effects across Latin America. Tren de Aragua operates in Colombia, Peru, Chile, and beyond. A US campaign framed around narco-terrorism resonates regionally. But for neighbors wary of US interventionism, the optics of jets buzzing a destroyer highlight a dangerous path toward escalation. Military analysts note that such flyovers are not unprecedented. During the Cold War, Soviet aircraft routinely shadowed US ships. But what makes this different is the context: an active US strike, escalating rhetoric from both capitals, and the deployment of F-35s to Puerto Rico. International law experts point out that while the US destroyer was in international waters, Venezuela can argue it was acting in defense of sovereignty. But the line between a show of force and an act of aggression is perilously thin. One miscalculation, a pilot flying too low, a jittery radar lock, a misunderstood maneuver, could trigger a military confrontation. The central question remains, was this flyover an accident of timing or Maduro's deliberate warning to Donald Trump? The symbolism is hard to miss. A US strike kills alleged Venezuelan cartel fighters. 2 days later, Venezuelan F-16 buzz a US warship. The Caribbean has suddenly become the stage for a geopolitical showdown. In a world where perception is as powerful as firepower, Maduro's F-16 may have done more than buzz a warship. They may have buzzed the boundaries of war and peace, as Trump promises to intensify operations against narco-terrorists and Maduro doubles down on military readiness. The Caribbean has become a tinderbox. To understand where this leads, we need to look at the bigger picture: history, geopolitics, and the dangerous game of signaling between Washington and Caracas. In short, on September 2nd, 2025, US strike sinks a boat tied to Tren de Aragua. On September 4th, 2025, Venezuelan F-16s fly over USS Jason Dunham. On September 5th, 2025, Trump orders F-35 stealth fighters to Puerto Rico. Each step has escalated the stakes. US-Venezuelan hostility is nothing new. For 2 decades, tensions have simmered. Sanctions, accusations of election fraud, and allegations of human rights abuses. Trump's first presidency already saw attempts to delegitimize Maduro, including recognition of opposition leader Juan Guaido in 2019. But the 2025 confrontation is different. Now Trump frames Maduro not only as a dictator, but as a cartel boss, equating the Venezuelan state with criminal syndicates. That language matters. It moves the debate from diplomacy to warfare. It justifies strikes on vessels, military deployments, and escalations in the Caribbean. Maduro, for his part, thrives on confrontation. He casts himself as the heir of Hugo Chavez, the man who stood up to Washington. Every US strike, every deployment of warships or jets is reframed at home as proof that Venezuela is under siege. And for Maduro, under siege means unified behind him. Military analysts dissecting the F-16 flyover note that it was precisely calibrated. The jets were close enough to be seen and recorded, far enough to avoid direct engagement. It was not a random patrol. It was a stage-managed warning. The Pentagon's use of the phrase highly provocative is telling. It suggests Washington sees the move not just as reckless flying, but as intentional brinkmanship. Why buzz a US destroyer? Because naval vessels are sovereign US territory under international law. By flying overhead, Venezuela wasn't just flexing, it was symbolically violating US sovereignty at sea. For Maduro, the F-16 flyover served 3 purposes. First is signal resolve, to show Trump that Venezuela won't cower even in the face of a US buildup. Second is rally domestic support. The flyover was broadcast as evidence that Venezuela's military is active, bold, and unafraid. Third is international messaging. By framing US strikes as illegitimate and hinting at fabricated evidence, Maduro aims to win sympathy among nations wary of American interventions, from Latin America to Russia and China. Already, Russian outlets have amplified Venezuela's claim that US evidence was AI-generated. Chinese media have quietly suggested that Washington is using narco-terror as a pretext for regime change. This isn't just a Venezuela-US standoff. It's a regional test case. For Washington, success in dismantling cartel-linked networks tied to Venezuela could be touted as a victory against transnational crime. For Trump, it reinforces his image as tough on drugs, tough on terrorism, and tough on dictators. For Caracas, survival means resisting US pressure, preserving sovereignty, and demonstrating strength in the face of overwhelming odds. For neighbors, countries like Colombia, Brazil, and Guyana are watching nervously. The Caribbean is becoming militarized. Every US deployment and Venezuelan flyover raises fears of spillover conflict. The Caribbean hasn't seen this level of military tension since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. That comparison, while imperfect, underscores how dangerous miscalculation can be. Security experts warn that these events form part of a classic escalation spiral. The US strikes a vessel. Venezuela responds with a flyover. The US counters with F-35 deployments. Venezuela mobilizes militias. Each step increases the risk of miscommunication. Military historians point out that World War I began with similar spirals: small moves, calibrated warnings, misinterpreted signals. International law experts add that while the US may claim self-defense against narco-terrorism, striking vessels in contested waters without UN authorization sets a troubling precedent. Venezuela's claim of AI fabrication further muddies the waters, raising questions about truth, evidence and perception in modern warfare. So what does this all mean? Maduro's F-16s didn't fire a shot, but in geopolitics, sometimes symbolism is more dangerous than missiles. The flyover was a message to Washington, to Venezuelans and to the world that Caracas will not be intimidated. For Trump, the challenge is clear: double down on military pressure or risk appearing weak in the face of defiance. For Maduro, the gamble is existential. Every act of resistance cements his control at home but risks confrontation abroad. The Caribbean is once again on the fault line of power. Whether this escalates into open conflict or fades into diplomatic posturing depends on the next moves and on whether both sides can hear the difference between a warning buzz and the opening shot of a war. In the skies above the Caribbean, one flyover raised the stakes. The question now: will it be remembered as a warning or the first step toward a showdown?